nice to be here. Thanks to Mike and Paul and the team for having me. I rarely get to speak at a conference in my own town, so that's quite a nice thing. So this morning, I'm going to talk about product principles, which is something that I've found over the years to be incredibly important in determining whether a product or project even succeeds or fails. And over the years, at INTERCOM in particular, we hear a lot about principles. But over the years in the other companies that I've worked in, when you kind of look back and see the things that worked and didn't work, principles, or the lack of principles, were often like one of the biggest reasons. And so this is what we're talking about. Why you should have product principles. I'm going to make the case for that and explain them to you. I'm going to talk about our 3 product principles, which are start with the problem, think big, start small, and ship to learn. I think they're quite universal or universally valuable, and so I'll talk to them. And then talk about how we ensure we follow our principles. It's one thing for us to have posters, which I'll show you. It's another thing entirely for the hundreds of people at INTERCOM to actually follow these principles day to day. So I bet everyone here at some point in their career has thought this to themselves. I was going to do an exercise where I was going to get you all to stand up, and I realized, and then get you to sit down if this wasn't true, but we'd all be sitting. So this is like a universal affliction of the product job. And there's loads of ways to think about this. Here are some examples of ways in which not to work. Cancelling projects, projects getting a major re-steer, political decision making. Here's 3 more. A lack of focus, new ideas not aligned with strategy, build the VIP, very important person's idea without question, make the same mistakes over and over. I've got lots more of these, by the way. Here's 4 more. Not holding each other accountable, not knowing what each other is doing, not knowing what we're doing or why, and then talking about your process more than doing it. So there's lots of ways in which not to work. And I'm actually happy to say, over the years at INTERCOM, we figured out ways to kind of eradicate all these things. And so we are far from perfect. We have learned a ton of things along the way and made big and small mistakes on a daily basis. But these things typically aren't present for the most part. And principles are the reason why. So being principle-driven can help you avoid all these scenarios. This is what a principle is, which some of you may be wondering, what is a principle? A principle is a fundamental truth or proposition that serves as the foundation for behaviour that gets you the results you want. So if you kind of look at that in reverse, you want specific results, not all those things we just looked at. You need behaviour, consistent behaviour that will get you those things, and therefore you need kind of truths or propositions to help you know how to behave. So I'm going to show you an example in a second. It's important to remember that principles are not rules. So rules make you do things, and they're kind of externally motivated, whereas principles aren't supposed to make you do things. They're just there to coach you and guide you. And so when you think about a principle, it should be internally motivated. You should want to follow it because it seems good and right and helpful, rather than a rule, which is something someone else wrote that they're making you do, and it's very externally motivated. So here's an example of a principle. This is not a principle, this is my kitchen, actually. And I come down here at about 6:30 every morning with my daughter. She's nearly 2. By the way, I have 3 kids, and so our kitchen never looks like this, in fact. Never, ever looks like this. So I'm down here at 6:30. It doesn't look like this. And Penny, our daughter, is drinking her milk or having her cereal. And I, of course, like everyone else, I'm sure in this room, have a terrible habit of looking at my phone when that's going on. Something I'll probably regret 20 years from now. But I do it every day. I look at my phone. We have an office in San Francisco that I work with a lot. I get emails every day. So I look at my phone, open it. There's like 10, 20 emails from people in SF. And at that hour of the morning, when you read these emails, you don't necessarily agree with all the things in the emails, and sometimes you have an emotional reaction to those emails, which may not be a positive reaction. And so to avoid me getting my day off to a bad start by reading these emails, I apply a principle, a dead simple principle, and that is always assume best intent. Always assume best intent. And when you do that, you realize, hey, the people who write these emails aren't trying to piss me off, I'd hope anyway, right? That's not what they're doing. They're trying to explain something, communicate something. They have a point of view. I have a different point of view. And so when I filter my brain to think about the idea that they have assumed best intent, everything changes. I'm no longer frustrated and upset and emotional, and it's actually relaxing and calming to think that they assumed best intent. And so this principle is really powerful because this idea, this proposition that people always have best intent, then serves as the foundation for that behaviour, the behaviour being me not freaking out and just generally feeling a bit more relaxed about the whole thing. And that gives me the behaviour that I want. I start the day off on the right foot, I reply, I know it's not like an angry person typing on a keyboard, it's like more relaxed than that. So that's an example of a principle, always assume best intent. So I mentioned earlier, we've 3 product principles at INTERCOM, and they came from the fight to survive. We didn't always have them when the company was founded. We didn't start with principles. We developed them over the years. And so if you think about the history of the company, and I won't talk a ton about the company today, but some of this is important context. When you think about the history of the company, it was founded in 2011, it was 4 founders, we had 1 product. I joined about a year or so later, year and a half later, so there was no revenue. You know, when the product was launched, it was free. And you can kind of fast forward to like 2019. We've just over 600 employees, actually. I got this wrong, but that's, you know, I have no idea how many employees we have. So it says a lot. We've just over 600. We've 6 products. We're actually launching a brand new product today, later today, so we'll have 7. And our current revenue is not publicly disclosed. But along the way, we told people that we had 50 million in revenue. So the business has grown in crazy ways. Both in terms of our employees and the products and revenue, I guess the kind of 3 big things you might care about. Along this journey, we've made big, small, okay and terrific and horrible mistakes. Everything imaginable, we did it. But these principles helped us kind of codify things so that we could continue to be successful. And so when you grow a team in a company, you need structured ways to, 1, repeat your successes, and 2, avoid repeating your mistakes. When you kind of see it written down like this, it sounds really easy, but of course we know it's absolutely not easy. And so to do this, to make sure you don't repeat your mistakes and you do repeat your successes, you need people to learn from each other. And especially if you're adding tons of new people to your company, your team, but even if you're growing more slowly or you're a bigger company and people are kind of moving in and out of the team and the team or company is staying the same size, you still need people to learn from each other. And you need them to stay aligned with each other. And so we talk about alignment a lot, and when I talk about alignment to people, I kind of explain it with this pretty simple diagram. I hope that, you know, wherever you work, you have something that looks like this, where there's a mission that the company has, there's a vision for the future, how you want the future to be different than the present. I assume that you do want it to be different, otherwise I don't know why you're building products. You should have a strategy that would fall from that vision. You make product decisions on a daily and weekly basis that should be in line with that strategy. And then there's like PM decisions, design decisions, engineering decisions, and so on. And so these kind of 2 lines basically illustrate that you're in alignment. And so when INTERCOM was founded and there was 4 people, they were all aligned with each other. It was very clear, they were sitting around one table, it was very clear where the company was going, and the decisions were totally transparent, it was very easy. But of course the company grew and we added people. And so but in the early days, it was easy to keep these people aligned because the company was small and you could teach and people could learn from each other very fast. And so you're kind of within the lines. But as you grow a company, different things start to happen. So for example, someone who is on board into the company through no fault of their own was kind of taught things in a different way. And they've learned things that are slightly different to what the company is trying to do. And then something kind of disturbing happens, and this has happened to us, and we've had to course correct this on multiple occasions, where this new person, again through no fault of their own, hires more new people, and this new person teaches those new people. So you start to see something like this, where all these new folks are actually slightly misaligned. And then one of these people, again, hires and onboards more people, and so now lots of people are misaligned. You can kind of extrapolate this out to something that looks like this, where half the company or maybe less are aligned and know what we're doing, and then all these other people are doing something else. And if you end up in this state, which I think is actually quite common in my experience, this happens. This is death, by the way. You're dead. You're dead. If you have this situation, you're dead. So lots of misalignment will kill your growing company. If you're a giant company, you probably have more room to survive. But if you're a smaller company or a growing company, this misalignment will eventually kill the company. You'll just go around in circles. So these principles came from this fight to survive for us and from reducing the risk that we'd fail. Because the story of INTERCOM is not a common one, and the chances of us being here today, and me being here today talking to you about all this, is actually quite rare and highly unlikely, highly unlikely. And so we managed to codify the mistakes we were making to not repeat them. So it's important to remember most businesses fail, and they fail for a set of very, very common reasons. For example, they have a poorly understood problem. They're solving a problem that they don't really understand, and therefore don't really solve it well. Or they have a niche problem. It's very specific to them. It's not generalizable. Often the VIP's idea falls into this neck of the woods. Or there's a bad market. Sometimes there's a good problem and it's well understood, and the market's just too small. There's actually not enough people in the world who care about that problem, and your business just can't grow fast enough. Or you have all this misalignment, wasted time. People then typically run out of runway or money or patience, or people just leave, employees just quit. Or people are dogmatic, stick to the things they believed in the past and don't adapt and change and evolve and don't learn from all the mistakes that they're making. And so our principles, like I said, have been a huge contributor to the success we've had. As a reminder, a principle is a fundamental truth or proposition that serves as the foundation for behaviour that gets you the results you want. So these are our 3 principles, and I'm going to go through each of them and then tell you how to enact principles with a process. So our 3 principles are: start with the problem, think big, start small, and ship to learn. This is the first one, and this is a poster, and I need to bend down and read it to you, which is why you probably shouldn't put posters on slides. So start with the problem. Start by deeply understanding the problem we're solving, continue to evolve this understanding, and persistently return to it to ensure you haven't veered off course. This is our first principle: start with the problem. And by the way, these principles may sound really obvious to a lot of people in this room. I imagine I'm preaching to the converted on a whole bunch of these, but it's actually the nuances that make the difference. So your solution is only as good as your understanding of the problem, which sounds really obvious. If you understand a problem better, your solution is better. If you understand a problem in less detail or less fidelity, your solution will be worse. When you think about product development, this is typically what every single project looks like, no matter what methodology you follow or care about or love. You prioritize the problem, you refine the problem, you design a solution, you build a solution, you run some kind of beta, and then you launch. And the important question when you think about these different phases is, how much time do you spend on each stage? So if you think about a project, how much time do you spend on each stage? Imagine that you had 100 points for all the work people do. If you looked at the design team and the PM team and engineers and researchers and analysts and whoever works on a project and looked at all the hours and kind of broke it down into 100 points, where would you spend those 100 points? That's the question. So I think most projects look like this, where about 5% of that time collectively might be prioritizing the problem, making sure it's an important problem. 5 might be refining it. 20 might be designing the solution. 55 build, 10 beta, 5 launch, something like that. And most people might think this is actually quite healthy, because there's other scenarios you might find yourself in, like this one, where 1% is on prioritizing the problem. You might talk about it a little bit, but you really don't want to because you just want to do it. Or you might pretend to refine it, but you really just want to do it. You want to get designing and building and launching. So this is another way to break up this time. Here's another way to break up the time. I experienced a lot of this type of breakdown prior to INTERCOM in other companies I worked at. And this is like, build our idea. Like, all right, are you sure this is a real problem people need? No one really cared about that. It was, build this thing our way. Don't really spend too much time designing it, because look, it turns out I actually designed it for you already. Here it is, build it, ship it. There's our friend Death back again. Every time I've ever experienced any breakdown like this, the project failed. The project failed. And I've worked on like some really big products over the years at Google and Facebook. And in particular, the prior one of those companies, this happened a lot in my experience, and all the projects failed. All of them, without exception. So the question is, why does this happen? Why does this happen? If we all can kind of like theoretically agree this is like a bad thing, why does it happen? It actually happens for very good reason. And it's because people are not wired to think in problems. People are actually wired to think in solutions. And there's lots of reasons for this. I'll get into the details here. Problem definition is hard work. It's not viewed as glamorous. The visible output doesn't reflect the work. I'll get into these three in a second. But it's also important to recognize that there's a lot of psychology behind a lot of this, and like evolutionary theory and so on. You know, if you go back thousands of years, for example, and you look at hunter-gatherer societies, they didn't really worry about the problem. Like, the problem was, we're hungry and we need food. You don't really reflect on that all that much and think, is that an important problem that we're hungry and need food? Right? They think about the solution. So, get food. Survive. And so solutions is how we've evolved as a species to think in terms of solutions. And so this is the default path. People don't, they like to say they might start with the problem or obsess with the problem, but in practice we don't. Typically we don't. First of all, it's really hard work. Problem definition is hard work. You have to like talk to lots of customers. You've got to analyze and interpret what they're saying and what they might actually need and synthesize all that data. Then you've got to get buy-in from like all these other people in the company that you all are agreed that the problem that you're trying to talk about is actually the problem you're going to go solve. It's not viewed as glamorous, you know. Lots of the things that are involved in problem definition, like doing research or like writing reports or giving a talk, is not nearly as glamorous as designing stuff and like showing cool prototypes. Right, that's the thing typically that more and more people get excited about. And the visible output doesn't reflect the work. You could do like a month of deep problem analysis to make sure that it's a really important problem and a problem lots of people have, and then the output could be a sentence. Right, so the idea that you've just spent a ton of work and the output of that is a sentence, and then you're going to show your manager or leader, hey, check out all the amazing work I did over the last month or so. Here it is in a sentence. Right, it's just, that usually doesn't fly. And so these are the reasons why people typically don't spend time on the problem. Here's another kind of story that illustrates another important point to this. Before I get into that, here's roughly how we spend time at INTERCOM, and I'll come back to this in a second. You know, the kind of spoiler here is that we spend way more time at the start. I'll get into the specifics in a sec. Here's a story though. When I was in university a long time ago, worked as a barista on weekends in Dublin Airport. And then if you're flying out, can savor the awful coffee that I and other people made there. I didn't work here. I apologize to whoever this company is. But it was just a weekend job, and I was paying my way through university. And I used to drive my manager crazy. And the reason was because I kept doing this. I kept asking her about everything. Like, why do we do it that way? Why do we open at this hour? Why do we open an hour earlier? It turns out all these people are waiting for us before we open. Why is the coffee over here, not over there? Why do we get these scones? Why is the storage stuff over there? I used to drive her nuts all the time, all day, just asking her like, why? And she'd say to me like, Paul, you are a student. Why do you give a shit? Like, you know, and I just was curious. Annoying as hell, you know, I kind of realize now in hindsight. But I was just curious. I just wanted to know how the thing worked and how the business worked and how the airport kind of fascinated me. And I just wanted to know how it worked. And if you're going to start with a problem and obsess about problems, you have to be curious. You have to have that mindset, as annoying as it might be. You have to have this mindset and asking why constantly. And so, like I said earlier, at INTERCOM, this is how we break down our time. So we roughly, I mean, again, this is not a science, this is an art and a kind of an illustration. But we spend a ton of time up front, a ton of time prioritizing the problem. We have a whole bunch of processes for how we talk with sales, how we talk with our support team, how we get feedback. Like they talk to hundreds of customers a day. We have ways to tag that information, sort it, prioritize it. In roadmap planning, we have like a whole bunch of processes that I'm actually not going to get into today about how we do this. But we spend a ton of time up front. And then we spend a ton of time refining the problem. And then we spend a ton of time designing the solution. And you can see these circles start to loop. So when we start refining the problem, we actually realize that maybe when we refine this problem, another problem is actually more important than this one. Or when we start designing solutions, we start to realize that actually, as we understand this better, I don't think we got it right the first time. Let's go again. And so we obsess at the start. And the reason for that is because we're trying to reduce the risk we'll fail. We're trying to reduce the risk that the thing we eventually bring to market won't land with people. They won't want to buy it. They won't want to use it. It's not a problem they actually care about. And as a result, because we obsess about the problem, there's actually very few cases where we've launched something and it's just failed outright. That's very, very rare, very rare. And it's because we start with the problem. There's like different loops here, like I mentioned this loop earlier. Here's another loop as like build a solution. We might go back and refine the problem. So like this thing kind of keeps going. So this is how we do it, how we start with the problem. We think about both problem prioritization and problem definition. We then deeply understand the problem that we're solving. We do not settle. We ask these 5 whys or more. We just keep going in the problem and in the solution. And then we don't assume the status quo solution is good. So we kind of get a bit obsessive about this. By the way, I have a link at the end to this deck where you can get the slides, so you don't have to worry too much about taking photos or notes unless you want to, because I'm going to fly through a lot of this. So we have anti-patterns also for every principle. So in each of these 3 principles, we have anti-patterns. Not thinking whether this is an important problem, not thinking whether this is a common problem, starting with a solution and not going back. Sometimes it's actually totally fine to start with an idea which looks like a solution and then like work backwards. That's normal. People have ideas all the time. And so like these loops matter a lot. But it's not okay to like get your idea and start with your solution and then keep going. Right? You got to go back and like restart with the problem and understand it. Not being curious enough and concluding too early, or overgeneralizing research or data, which we've done in the past at times too. So there's also anti-patterns to these principles. That's the first principle, start with the problem. Second one is think big, start small. So I'm going to read this out to you again. Think ambitiously, but know that big things have small beginnings. Always try to find the smallest coherent solution. Starting small enables you to ship sooner. So the third principle, by the way, is ship to learn. And these are kind of sister principles in a sense. And there's an order to these. These are in order. Start with the problem. Think big, start small. Ship to learn. So think big, start small. Here's other principles that exist too. They're just not our principles. Think big, start big. Or think small, start big. And these days, thanks to a whole bunch of things like lean startup and everything that's spun out of that theory, the top one probably resonates, and everyone here probably applies some version of that. It's in fashion, quite frankly, to start small in a sense. We have found it to work. Think big, start small to work. But these things are equally valid, and that's an important thing about principles. There should be opposite principles and different principles that are equally valid. And so, for example, if you're Apple, who apparently are building a car, you can't really start small with a car. You kind of got to go big. So for Apple, I bet their principle, if they have one, on that project is much more around thinking big and starting big. And that is absolutely the right thing to do, probably. Or if you're an infrastructure company and you need to just lay out a whole bunch of stuff, potentially put undersea cables across the Atlantic for better interconnectivity, or the electricity grid, all sorts of reasons why you might want to think small. Hey, it's cables under the sea. It's just cables under the sea. So let's just put cables under the sea, right? And start big. Well, they need to be big cables, and that sea is pretty big, right? So think small, start big is a valid principle too for lots of different types of companies. For us, it's think big, start small. And this is why we believe in the power of thinking big. This is vision, mission. You've got to think big and have a long-term plan. But we know that big things have small beginnings, so we always try to find the smallest coherent solution. So this is why we do it. We'd much rather deliver the value of and learn from a V0.1 today, then a V1 next month. The idea is to minimize the effort and time to deliver value and learn. And we want to avoid over-optimization early. So that's why we think big and start small. But like I said earlier, it's actually the nuances that matter, because I bet lots of people in this room would say, we also start small. Here's things we don't do when we apply this principle. We do not ship things that don't work. And I need to refrain from ranting at you about this for 10 minutes. The idea that somebody would put something out into the world with buttons that don't do things, and you're like, well, we'll see if people will click. Or shipping like dead ends in products. That is just terrible product, in my opinion. And I apologize to anyone who's forced to do it. Or if you want to do it, I would persuade you not to. That's just bad. That's just bad. Don't ship things that don't work. You are taking your problems and putting them on your customers. You're asking your customers to solve the hard decisions that you're failing to solve yourself. I think that's terrible practice. So we don't do that. We do not ship things that don't work. Everything we ship, we hold to an incredibly high standard. So don't ship it that don't work. And then secondly, do not ship janky shit. Don't ship janky shit. You know, like UI that's like a bit crap, and people are like, oh, I'm not really proud of that, but like, hey, we're starting small, right? It's like, no, that's not the idea. Right? The idea is like, you know, to scope down and then ship something you're proud of, and don't make your customers suffer because you're like cutting corners. That's not the principle. That's not what it means. So don't ship broken stuff and don't ship janky shit. The biggest thing that we come up against when new people join the company, we're kind of teaching these principles, is how small is small. And the most common thing that happens here is we have to encourage people to think bigger. Hey, think even bigger. And then think smaller, right? So most people end up in the middle. It's like, how small is small? Smaller. Right, so I'm going to show you an example of this. We're trying to sell people, like, get the very, very smallest solution that will coherently solve the problem. That's what we're trying to do. Here's a quick example. We have reporting in INTERCOM. So, you know, INTERCOM is a customer communication platform. We have reports to report on, you know, all the communication people are having with their customers. And so we have this problem. You know, this is like more or less a real problem we had recently. Make it easier to get value from our reports. So our customers are saying, hey, we need make it easier. We need to see this value. We're not really sure. And so we asked ourselves, okay, start with the problem. Let's obsess about this thing. Is that about access? Is it the reports are good? People just can't access them or don't know where to find them? Or is it the quality of the reports? Hey, they can see all the reports all the time. But the reports are just a bit crap and they just don't do what people need them to do. And actually turns out it was both of these things. We need to work on both. But we broke it down into two problems, so not to conflate things. We said, hey, let's talk about access, accessing these reports. How do people access the reports in INTERCOM today? And so you can kind of like, all right, like, you know, let's start thinking about solutions here. Well, we could like email people. That would be a good way to get access. People use email every day, to my point earlier about my kitchen. We could email people a richly formatted interactive HTML report. Okay, smaller. Start smaller. Okay, we could email a single number report, right? It would be much smaller to start with. Just like one number, it gives them like the top line insight, and then a view more link. And they click view more, back to the app, see the dashboard. Okay, so that's smaller. Smaller again. Well, we can just email them a PDF of their dashboard. So don't need to build much here at all. Just export as PDF, which exists already. Just email that PDF. It's kind of easy. Okay. Now we're getting closer because all of these things might actually solve the problem. The PDF might solve the problem of access. All right, smaller. Go again. Just send people an email and say, your weekly report's ready. Click here to view. That actually might solve the problem too. And that's actually almost no work. And this is the celebration we might have. Hey, that's almost no work. That's a good thing. And so by doing this, by just sending people, our customers, an email, a weekly email, and say, hey, your latest stats are ready, check it out, might actually solve this problem. And so we obsess and we obsess and we obsess about going smaller and smaller and smaller and doing the least amount of work possible to solve that problem, because then we can move on to something else. So here's how we do it. We have a table, and all these ideas for solving this problem we put into these three columns. Essentials, this thing is essential to the solution. almost everything goes in the maybes category. And then we've differentiators. Sometimes the essentials column should be tiny and the maybes column should be really, really big. And we've got these differentiators. And so sometimes it's important to like add something that kind of differentiates your solution from the competition, or maybe something that better aligns with the vision and mission and strategy that you've got. And so sometimes we add stuff in that differentiates us from the market. Here's anti-patterns for Think Big, Start Small. Shipping an incomplete or janky solution. Shipping without any intent to learn and improve. Don't ship and not hope to learn, which we'll get on to in a second. Starting small because it's easier and faster. Not starting with a bigger idea. Assuming new things are in scope by default. Or being ruthlessly dumb. We've done that sometimes. I've been guilty of that because I'm always obsessing about cutting. And then sometimes it's like, Paul, that just makes no sense anymore. Like you've cut off your arm. It's like, oh yeah, shit, I have. All right, put it back. All right, so that's Think Big, Start Small. Okay, third one, ship to learn. The sooner you ship, the sooner you get feedback on your assumptions and your solution, so you can learn quickly if you're having impact. Shipping is the beginning more than the end. So here's a question. When is the best time to leave your team or leave your company? Most people's best time is just after the project's finished. I'm going to change team, that was a bit of a shit show, or I'm going to leave now, it's on my CV, etc. And this is actually the worst time for someone to leave a company because shipping is the beginning more than the end. Learning and iterating takes discipline. It takes discipline to ship to learn, and it's the easiest thing in the world to not learn and to move on to new things and other cool stuff that's happening. This is why we do it, why we ship to learn. Assumptions carry risk. Bigger assumptions carry more risk. And then an accumulation of assumptions is just like danger land, massive risk. So big projects, accumulation of assumptions, that's like something to be very, very nervous about. And the reason is because we always assume we'll get some things wrong. We always assume that. We always assume we'll get some things wrong. So what we're trying to learn is that we had this problem and have we solved it? That's the problem. That's the reason that we're trying to ship to learn. Have we solved this problem that we set out to solve? Are people using what we shipped? Are they happily paying for it? I often tell people that others paying for your product is a really good benchmark for whether it's useful and valuable and good for them. Everyone's happy to use a free thing, but if people will actually hand over their hard-earned money, that's an entirely different measure. So we say that shipping at INTERCOM is an act of confidence and humility. And what we mean by that is the first two principles give us the confidence that we started with the problem, we thought big, we started small, and then we are now going to ship to learn. So we're confident that we did a good job. We're humble, knowing and assuming we'll get some stuff wrong. And I often kind of joke with people that the more confident they are, the more worried I get. Which is a corridor chat I tend to have with people sometimes. So this is how we do it. We explicitly describe what we want to learn. We break things down into smaller independent releases to learn as fast as possible. We start with the biggest risks. We usually start with ourselves. And we say to people, hey, you can skip all this, because this is really about risk at the end of the day. All of this is about risk mitigation, making sure that we try and ship something people care about and do a good job doing it. So you can skip all of it and trade off speed for risk, if you want to. And then you inherit the drama of whether you got it right or not. These are the anti-patterns for ship to learn. Shipping without a hypothesis, shipping something that doesn't meet our quality bar, shipping simply because it seems like the next step, assuming shipping is the only way to learn, optimizing for shipping over everything else, abdicating our responsibility for making design decisions for our users, which is what I was talking about earlier. So these are the anti-patterns for ship to learn. So there are the three principles that we've got. Start with the problem, think big, start small, and ship to learn. And so when I talk to people outside the company about these things, and sometimes in the company, I often get this back. Okay, nice theory. What about in practice? Like in reality, do people actually follow this stuff? And the answer is yes. And the reason is because we have process. And our process and our principles is the reason that we can ship successful products. Our process for building product comes from our principles. So the process that we have actually comes from the principles. I think everyone here knows what a process is, but I think it's important to think about it, because when you see it written down like this, it's easy to hate process. And you see it written down, you're like, that actually makes a lot of sense. It's a series of steps and actions taken in a particular order to achieve a particular outcome with a certain level of predictability. That actually sounds like an awesome thing. And I'm a big fan of process, and like everything in life, You've got bad doctors as well as good ones. You've got bad process and good process. And so we obsess a lot about making good, simple process for people. So like I said earlier, our principles and process enable us to leverage what we've learned to work and scale the company in a predictable way. I'm going to show you our process. I'm not going to get into it because walking through our process is an entirely different talk that would take as much time as it is to talk about these principles. But I'm going to show you how they map together. So our process is basically in 3 phases. One is setup. So we define the problem. We have concept design, and then we've story. Story is like, what's the story we're going to tell our customers, right? This is like a really important collaboration between our marketing team and our product team. What's the story of this product? Why would they care? And the story, of course, comes from the problem understanding. Second is solve. So we scope that concept down. We'll have this first solution. We'll design it, we'll build it, and then we'll beta it. And the last is called closeout, where we finalize the solution based on what we learned in the beta. We ship it, we announce it, and then we evaluate and close it. So that's our process. It's really important to know that this looks very kind of waterfall-y, and in reality, that's not how it works at all. It's very fluid. So for example, like we go back and forth between these phases. It's not like a sign-off thing. Concept design teaches us that our problem definition isn't good enough. We need to go back there. Or like we start scoping to realize, we've got to go again. We don't fully understand this. We need more data. We need more research. We need to just think about it more and dwell on it, right? And you go to arrow. I had a version that's put arrows everywhere because that's actually what happens in practice. As we move through these steps and phases, we actually go back and rethink things. But this is roughly how we work. And so this is the important point. All of our principles are at play here. So start with the problem. Think big. Start small. Ship to learn. And then lastly, evaluate and close. Have we solved the problem? Have we solved the problem for people? If so, brilliant. Project done. Move on to something else. If not, we need to figure out what we're going to do. Are we going to go again and go back through some of these phases, or are we going to spin off a new project that will try and solve it in a different way? So our process ensures that we follow our principles. Okay, last thing. Here's some tips for being principle-driven. One is, don't write truisms. A truism is just something everyone would agree with. Like, hey, our principle is ship software. Well, like, as opposed to don't ship software, that wouldn't be very good. So don't write things that everyone's just going to agree with, like good design. Okay. It has to have an opposite, equally valid principle, right? Think big, start small. Think big, start big. That's equally valid. And different companies, that would make sense for them, right? So there has to be an opposite principle. Second is that stability matters. These principles should change very slowly. The 3 principles I shared this morning are years in the making, and we've used them for years and years at the company. Think big, start small, and ship to learn have existed for almost as long as I've been at INTERCOM, like 6 years. Start with the problem had like a different name. It was actually 2 different principles that we merged together. We used to have 4. But the principles should change very slowly. Right? It shouldn't be that you've got new principles all the time. That, again, go back to that alignment thing. If you've got new principles, you've got all sorts of messiness. Your process must match your principles. If your process is different to your principles, turns out that you've got actually different implicit principles in the company. Second last, evidence matters. So these principles are supposed to lock in previous lessons learned. You're not supposed to make this shit up. That's not how it works. They're supposed to lock in all the mistakes you've made over the last days, weeks, months, and years. So they should be evidence-driven. And then lastly, integrity matters. These shouldn't come from the top. These should be a collective thing. Everyone should have a part in making these principles. So you've got to create them with input from everyone. Back to the idea earlier, they're not rules, right? They're things that people should want to follow because they think they're good and right and will lead to better outcomes. So that's it. That is product principles. If you want these slides, you can mail me and I'll send them on. And other than that, thank you very much.